There are moments when the difference between life and death isn't made by the person with the biggest title, the most expensive suit, or the corner office. Sometimes, it comes down to the one person everyone walks past without a second glance. On one storm-filled night, while doctors desperately fought to keep their patients alive and nurses searched the hallways for anyone who could help, the fate of an entire hospital rested in the hands of a man few people even knew by name. His name was Frank. For more than 3 decades, Frank had quietly cleaned floors, emptied trash bins, polished hallways, and smiled at strangers who rarely looked back. To most people, he was simply the janitor. To a handful of nurses and maintenance workers, he was the man who somehow always knew how to fix whatever had gone wrong. But no one, not the doctors, not the board of directors, and certainly not the hospital's newly appointed CEO, could have imagined that before sunrise, Frank would make a decision that would save hundreds of lives. Even harder to believe was what happened only days later. Instead of receiving a medal, a promotion, or even a simple thank you, Frank walked out of the same hospital carrying a cardboard box filled with his personal belongings after being fired by the very people whose reputations he had protected. The question that stunned everyone wasn't whether he deserved better. It was why anyone would fire the man responsible for preventing one of the worst disasters in the hospital's history. The answer begins long before the lights went out. It begins with a hospital that looked successful from the outside. Families trusted it with their loved ones. Doctors competed for positions inside its walls. Awards decorated the lobby, and every annual report painted a picture of excellence. Patients believed they were entering one of the safest medical facilities in the state. Yet beneath those polished floors and spotless hallways were aging electrical systems, outdated emergency equipment, and maintenance reports that had slowly piled up inside filing cabinets no executive seemed interested in reading. As budgets became tighter and pressure mounted to increase profits, expensive repairs were postponed again and again. Every delay looked harmless on a spreadsheet. Every postponed inspection saved money for another quarter. But somewhere inside the building, problems that couldn't be ignored forever continued to grow. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Then everything changed with the arrival of the hospital's new CEO, Ethan Caldwell. Young, ambitious, and celebrated for turning struggling healthcare organizations into profitable businesses, Ethan arrived with bold promises of modernization, efficiency, and financial discipline. Within weeks, meetings focused less on patient care and more on operating costs. Every department was expected to justify its budget. Every expense was questioned. Every repair had to compete with quarterly financial targets. To Ethan, numbers told the whole story. To Frank, numbers could never reveal what happened when an aging hospital was pushed beyond its limits. Neither man realized it then, but their very different ways of seeing the same building were quietly moving toward a collision that would change both of their lives forever. On the night everything finally went wrong, one question echoed through the dark hallways as alarms sounded and emergency lights flickered across frightened faces. "Where's maintenance?" But the answer came back immediately from someone who understood the hospital better than anyone else. "Forget maintenance, find Frank." At that moment, no one was thinking about job titles. No one cared about executive offices or corporate strategies. The only thing that mattered was whether one quiet janitor could accomplish what an entire hospital system could not. And what happened over the next few hours would leave an entire community asking one question that still refuses to disappear. How could the man who saved so many lives become the first person shown the exit? Nobody starts working as a hospital janitor expecting to become the difference between life and death. Frank certainly didn't. 32 years earlier, he had accepted the position simply because he needed steady work after a manufacturing plant where he had spent nearly a decade suddenly shut its doors. Friends encouraged him to look elsewhere, telling him he was capable of much more, but Frank believed there was dignity in every honest job. From his very first day, he treated every hallway, patient room, and waiting area with the same care someone else might reserve for their own home. While others rushed to finish their shifts, Frank noticed the little things. A loose ceiling tile, a leaking valve, an electrical panel that made a strange humming sound every afternoon. Most employees walked past these details without thinking twice. Frank couldn't. His curiosity had become a habit, and that habit would eventually place him in the center of a crisis no one saw coming. The nurses often joked that Frank knew the hospital better than the architects who had designed it. If an elevator hesitated between floors, Frank could usually predict which relay was beginning to fail. If a pipe rattled during heavy rain, he already knew where to find the source of the vibration. Even some of the maintenance technicians quietly admitted they sought his advice before attempting complicated repairs. Frank never asked for recognition. He simply believed that every problem ignored today became someone else's emergency tomorrow. That philosophy earned him respect from the people working beside him every day, but it rarely reached the executive offices several floors above. To leadership, Frank's employee file listed only one title: Janitor. It never mentioned the thousands of small disasters he had quietly prevented over 3 decades. When Ethan Caldwell became CEO, the atmosphere inside the hospital changed almost overnight. Staff meetings became shorter, budgets became tighter, and every department was expected to justify every dollar spent. Ethan wasn't a cruel man by reputation. In fact, newspapers praised him for rescuing struggling healthcare organizations across the country. Investors admired his discipline. Board members celebrated his confidence. He believed every successful institution depended on efficiency, and efficiency meant eliminating unnecessary expenses. Unfortunately, aging infrastructure rarely fits neatly into a financial presentation. Replacing electrical equipment didn't attract donors. Repairing emergency generators didn't appear in glossy hospital brochures. Those projects quietly disappeared to the bottom of priority lists while cosmetic renovations continued to move forward. Fresh paint covered walls. The main lobby received expensive furniture. Digital displays welcomed visitors with polished animations. Meanwhile, hidden beneath those same floors, critical systems continued growing older with every passing month. Frank noticed the changes immediately. He began seeing maintenance requests delayed for reasons that had nothing to do with safety. Replacement parts were ordered weeks later than usual. Preventive inspections became less frequent. Contractors who once serviced emergency equipment on a regular schedule suddenly appeared only when absolutely necessary. At first, Frank assumed it was temporary. Every organization experienced financial adjustments. But then he found something that genuinely troubled him. During one of his routine rounds through a lower mechanical corridor, he stopped beside the hospital's backup power equipment after hearing a faint vibration that hadn't existed before. It wasn't loud. Most people would have ignored it completely. Frank didn't. He opened an inspection panel and discovered signs of moisture slowly spreading across wiring that should have remained perfectly dry. The damage wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was enough to convince him the system needed immediate attention. He reported everything exactly as procedure required. He documented the location, described the unusual vibration, attached photographs, and submitted the report through the maintenance office. Days passed without a response. He followed up again. Another week passed. Eventually, a supervisor quietly admitted the repairs had been postponed because replacing the affected equipment would cost far more than the department's remaining budget allowed. Frank left that conversation more concerned than ever before. He understood machinery. He knew electrical systems rarely failed without warning. They whispered long before they screamed. Every unusual sound, every small leak, every flickering warning light was part of a conversation most people never learned to hear. Frank feared the hospital had stopped listening altogether. What he didn't know was that the storm forecast for the following week would test every warning he had tried so hard to deliver, and when darkness finally covered the hospital, there would be no more opportunities to postpone the decision everyone wished they had made sooner. Frank had spent more than 3 decades quietly doing a job most people barely noticed, yet those years had given him something no executive report or financial spreadsheet could ever measure. He knew the hospital like few others did. Every unusual sound, every aging system, and every overlooked warning meant something to him, because he understood that small problems rarely stayed small forever. While new leadership focused on reducing costs and improving quarterly numbers, Frank saw maintenance requests delayed, inspections postponed, and critical repairs pushed aside. None of those decisions seemed urgent on their own, but together they painted a picture that deeply concerned him. Then, during one of his routine rounds, Frank discovered troubling signs around the hospital's emergency power system. He immediately reported everything through the proper channels, documented the issue, and urged that repairs be made before the problem became dangerous. Days turned into weeks, yet nothing changed. The repairs were delayed because they were considered too expensive. Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital was taking a risk it couldn't afford to take. As the forecast warned of a powerful storm approaching, Frank carried a growing sense of unease. He hoped his concerns would prove unnecessary, but experience told him otherwise. He knew that when critical systems fail, they rarely do so at a convenient time. And as thunderclouds gathered over the city, no one inside the hospital realized they were only hours away from a crisis that would test every decision that had been made and reveal that the quiet janitor everyone overlooked might soon become the only person capable of saving them. Thanks for watching.